you and excited to get to know one of the most important and renowned authors when it comes to contemporary literature, and also very, very important to us, because Edmund White has shaped and molded our very identity, both as readers and in some cases even as writers, also as human beings to an extent. And tonight, what will be happening is as follows. I will be introducing the fantastic book that you have written, and also about the topics that you touch on. And then after that, each of us will be asking questions. And of course, you've already received some of them.
Yes, I've seen them, yes.
So I'll summarize the plot of this fantastic book. Two people, Constance and Ruggiero, are in holiday in Engadine in Switzerland. Ruggiero is an old but also very handsome Sicilian man. We are in 2050. He's a Sicilian aristocrat, and as a child, he grew up in Castelnuovo with his grandfather, without his parents. And his grandfather was his guardian, was also the person who brought him up, whereas his parents abandoned him, in a sense. And he's a very renowned harpsichordist. And he reached all these dreams of glory that he tried to achieve. And Ruggiero in 2050 is in Switzerland with his wife, who's a lot younger than him, and he has a skiing accident. After having come back from the hospital, where he pays loads of money in Switzerland, of course, and he complains about the very steep costs in hospitals in Switzerland. And that's something that got a lot of laughs out of me. And then he makes a contract with his wife, so to speak. They decide to tell each other about their past adventures from a romantic perspective. And the idea is to write them down to begin with, and then to read them out to each other. And all these stories are absolutely something very exciting and arousing, even from a sexual perspective. But amongst the various romantic adventures that Ruggiero had a long time ago, especially around 2020, there's a very special one to which he devotes a lot of time. So his exploit with Edmund White, who's here with us, his love affair with his great writer, of whom, of course, he was a great admirer and fan. And the love between Ruggiero and Edmund White, we find out as we read the book, is a bit of a mirror to the love that exists also between Constance and Ruggiero. It is also a bit of an opaque mirror, so to speak, misty mirror. There are lots of similarities, but also some differences, to be honest. And I think that this book, on the one hand, is deeply innovative, and on the other, also something which is very much Edmund Whitey, innovative from the point of view of the other book that you have written, but also, in a sense, it is in connection. It kind of continues the legacy of biographies and autofictions that you have written, as well as essays and short stories and novels, and like A Saint from Texas.
Yeah.
So he is, of course, a multifaceted author generally. So it's an innovative book and tries to change itself, even in its original structure that we'll be discussing, but also in the topics it touches on. One of the key ones is old age, and then the decay of old age, the horror of old age, such as the foul-smelling breath of the old man, as well as the fatness and having a micro penis and having become impotent. So this old age, which is diametrically opposed to youth, that Edmund White discussed in City Boy, a previous book of his. And also another topic is the dread, the fear of death, as well as the fear of dying without any glory left, without having become somebody important, like Ruggiero was dreaming of course, also Edmund White in the book. Another topic is the impossible love between a young man and an old man, and this romantic relationship, which is absolutely erotic, but also pedagogical between these young and old lovers. And for Edmund White, one of the key themes has really been the erotic desire as an engine of life. At the same time, in the previous books, this erotic desire, this lust could only be fulfilled through potency, really. But now we have an old man, Edmund White, who tragically is impotent now. And then another topic is, of course, the politically correct and incorrect. And that's something that's got me cracking lots of times throughout the book. In fact, I got laughing, but I also found it tragic to an extent, with the irony on the Me Too movement that in America established of a Cold War USSR climate. Also the irony on cancel culture as well. And then another very important topic is the narcissism displayed by main characters. At some point, Ruggiero says, the person that I admire the most was myself. My own dick that could be grasped with two hands, my elegance, my Sicilian nose. And he also goes on as so far as to say something very, very narcissistic. It was exciting to see myself through other people's eyes. And then, as I was saying before, there's this Edmund White style, which are his typical stylistic features, love for languages, in particular for Italian and French, but also, in this case, Sicilian too. And as an Italian author, I realized what the etymology of tifosi was, which is something that I found out about for the first time here. As an Italian, I never really thought about it. I didn't even know there was just a sports fan, but also a person who suffers from typhus. And then also the expression to go hand in hand or arm in arm, a braccetto, or the idea of mutande, mutatis mutandis, changing things. And also the donna immobile. And there's also French expressions and so on, and Sicilian ones too. That's really interesting. Another recurrent theme is the marked presence of sex. When I read this book, and when I used to read books by you, of course, I was very, very aroused by what I was reading. And that is one of the most beautiful things of Edmund White's novels, as he writes in this book, even sex is very easy to portray on video, on film, but it's very, very hard to write about it. And White does so sublimely. And sometimes it's even fetishist sex. And then another very important trait of Edmund White's fiction is the anecdotes that he tells us about. And within the same page, very often we have philosophy, Wittgenstein, and psychology. And something that I loved very, very much, and I wrote about this in my notes, is a passage about psychology where you say that the unconscious cannot really make or differentiate between abandoning and being abandoned. So that's absolutely fantastic, even from a psychological point of view. And then this history of art, Rosso Fiorentina's paintings, for example. And then there's Eva Cantarella, who's also mentioned, Baroque music. And dear Edmund, I have to say that one of our readers, Asta, listened to each and every one of your Baroque pieces of music, the ones that you mentioned. And something important also to note is that Asta, apart from being passionate about music, but also Baroque music, thanks to you, is somebody that he's allowed me to say is called the Albanian bull. And I think this idea of the Albanian bull is a person that you would absolutely love. And you would enjoy him to the full. So it's an exhilarating book, but also a very deeply tragic and painful book. So I would like to start with the first question that I'm going to be asking myself, and then we'll have the further questions by other members of our group. The first question is about the way that old age is told about in this book. Old age here is described very ironically, but at the same time also ruthlessly, and it causes discomfort. The fate of the old person is to be abandoned by the very person that loves him, and being ugly, impotent, but above all, being conflicted, not having been able to make peace with one's own narcissism and meanness of spirit. And then at the same time, the old man is also decaying physically. And that is something that is documented in a very raw way. You become ugly and limp, and your breath is bad. You have heart disease, and you're impotent. And above all, something I really appreciated very much is the absence of sentimentalism about old age. Very often, old age is spoken about as an age of, or a season of wisdom, so to speak, where we are completely calm and collected and mature. And I think of this novel by Kantarov, Our Souls at Night, where the story of two lovers is spoken about in such a lyrical way as well, but also in an unrealistic way because of that specific reason. Whereas you talk about this in a very real and raw way. So at the same time, that's why we ask ourselves now, is this the tragic fate of an old man or woman? Is it something that will befall us all when we become old?
Well, I think that I mean, in a way, it's sort of a false message on my part, because I'm a pretty happy person, even though I'm 82 years old. And I think it's because of my work. I get to work a lot, and I like writing, and so I feel fulfilled. I mean, right now I'm working on, I have a novel coming out in January, and then I'm 200 pages into another one. And so everybody teases me for being too productive. But in a way, it's the fear of death that drives me to writing, even though I know that posthumous glory means nothing. But it's still fun to practice your art.
Now we have a question from Matteo.
Well,
So the question that I'd like to ask is about the relationship between writing and love, especially in the first part of the book. The two protagonists of this first part, Constance and Rogero, decide to write and then read out to each other the story of their own life and romantic exploits. But after that, what happens to their couple is that they break up. And therefore, the question I'd like to ask is about whether this idea of writing as casting off one's mask on one's own story could actually break up a couple, and whether it's maybe necessary to even hide something within one's relationship in order to continue living happily together. And I'd like to add, as Giacomo, that in one passage of the book, you say writing is a goodbye kiss.
is a what?
A goodbye kiss.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, I've had lovers who've said to me, "Why don't you ever write about me?" And I said, "The day I write about you will be the end of our affair," because I do think it's sort of, it's hard to write about people who are currently in your life. And I think that that Ruggiero and Constance are afraid to tell each other about their past, because they've done that with earlier relationships, not through writing, but through talk. And they're afraid that it might separate them, and it does separate them. I mean, you know, I think one of the themes of the book, I think, is that Europeans like discretion, and Americans like honesty, and that doesn't really go together. But I think that Matteo's question about love and writing, I do think that, I mean, someplace in the book it says that writing a novel is like having a lover. It ties your days together. And I think that it's true that love is a project, and so is writing a novel. And it, it, they are very linked, I think, especially a writer like me who writes so much about the erotic.
Okay. We'll have another question now. Good evening. Now is my question. One of the topics that came up even during the debate that we had about this book is about the idea of fame and popularity. Roger and White seem to both be scared, terrorized of the fact that they might disappear from collective memory. And so they're scared of being forgotten. Like any narcissists, they have this self-aggrandizing idea of themselves. They are scared of this destiny of fate that befalls the average man, disappearing from family and collective memory. So we were wondering then if this dread is a way of cheating death, the fear of death, perhaps. And if we are fated to die at some point, isn't it a bit unreasonable to be so interested in what will remain of us after our death?
Yeah, well, my husband agrees with you completely. He thinks that it's silly to write, and that it's silly to care about your posthumous fame or even your current fame, because everything is going to be destroyed very soon. And so I don't know, but I guess when I was very young, I wanted to be, that was my biggest ambition, was to be a famous writer. And I uh, and if you put the word glory in for fame, fame sounds so tacky, so bad to us, but glory, sounds very nice. And so I think that also, I was very great friends with the French philosopher Michel Foucault, and he felt that the only thing, since there is no God, and since everything is sort of pointless, nevertheless, he felt that the ancients believed that you could make your life something admirable, and that you would have a kind of posthumous glory. It was as though you were creating a sculpture during your life of, of yourself, and that this might be something people in the future would admire. And that seemed to him a, a basis for morality and a sort of noble goal. I don't know. It's very questionable, but because death makes nonsense out of all those things. But you know, you still have. I mean, I think your primitive drive toward fame or celebrity or love or whatever it is that people have, athletic glory or happiness.
Good evening, Edmund. I'd like to ask you a question on behalf of Max, who is translating for you.
Yes, thank
So
you,
of
Max.
course, you cannot ask the question directly. Max would like to ask you why you decided to set this particular novel in the 50s, now of this century, to speak about yourself and to also speak about yourself in the third person. One
Yeah.
hypothesis that that Max had is that you might have chosen this in order to have more freedom, or perhaps to be even more pitiless, more ruthless towards the character of Edmund White, an author who in the 50s very, very few people still know, unlike Sedaris, for instance, that is still so very well known.
Well, I put it in the future because I wanted it to be wanted the plot to happen when Ruggiero himself was old, and also long after Edmund had died. So and the book speculates that very few people know who Edmund White was in 2050, but a few do, and the Ruggiero character is very fortunate because he's beautiful, he's a prince, and he has a big dick. So he has gone on being very, very happy and successful. And he doesn't seem to regret his affair with Edmund, which didn't go so well. But I think so. I guess some old people are fairly happy if they have if they stay in good health. I used to live in Paris. I lived in Paris for 16 years, and I lived next door to the Rothschilds, and they always seemed to be a very happy couple because they had everything. They lived in a beautiful palace, and they had lots of friends, and they were beautiful, and they were rich.
Good evening, Edmund.
Uh,
My question is very, very simple. Are there any messages that you would have wanted to convey through this novel? Anything that you wanted to say in particular? And if that is so, then what messages are those?
You know, my best friend is a Chinese woman writer who lives in America called Yi Yun Lee, and she just wrote an essay about ism. And she said people who always want novels to be about something, that she doesn't feel her novels are about anything, no paraphrasable message. And I don't know. I don't know. My characters in this book, Vici d'arte, vici d'amore, and I think that the connection between art and love is something that is important to me. But I guess I feel that old age, as Shakespeare says, old age is slightly foolish, and and tragic. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that.
Hello. I'd like to ask a question about this very interesting topic of the mirror effect, as Giacomo was saying in his introduction, that comes about and involves various characters, especially the two couples in the book. On the one hand, we have a young woman and an older man, and then we have a young man and an old man. And it is also quite interesting that Ruggiero plays both roles, both the one of the old and the young man. As well as that, he's also a person who leaves, dumps Edmund White, and then is dumped by Constance in turn. So what is the meaning of this particular mirror effect? What are the similarities and differences between these characters, but also, for instance, is there splitting, they're breaking up as couples? Is it grounded on the same reasons or perhaps different because the couples are different?
I think different one. I think you're right that different reasons animate them. I think Ruggiero, I think, really loves Edmund, and that I mean, because you can fake it for 3 days, but not for 3 years, which is how long they were together. But I think he was always worried about Edmund being so old, and and I think when they go to Fire Island, where there's so many young couples, where they're both beautiful and they both are muscular, and they both are lawyers or doctors. I mean, it's this kind of magical place where it's a race, but nobody wins it because every year they're getting older. Anyway, but when he sees that and all these young couples, and then he's with Grandpa, who can't even take a moonlight walk with him because his walking is so bad, I think that really is what causes him to reevaluate his whole love for Edmund. I think that he fell in love with Edmund through his writing, and but then now, after 3 years of being with this decaying old man, he wants somebody his own age. It's not a younger guy, but somebody his own age who is beautiful and youngish. And so I think that, but with the with the I think the with the Constance Ruggiero couple, I think that she feels that he is so proud and so superior and so distant in a way that she finally falls in love with this well-to-do, handsome, but rather average man whom she marries and has a child with, though the child turns out to be a genius, like Ruggiero. Anyway, and kind of gay, I guess. And but anyway, I think the couples do break up for different reasons. I don't think that that Constance is horrified by Ruggiero being so old, because he's so handsome still. And I think women are more loving than men are and more forgiving. I mean, I always say the gay male life is so awful because you have to be as beautiful as a woman and as successful as a man. And I mean, now everything's changed, but that was true in the 50s when I was growing up. And so I don't know. I think that they do break up for different reasons, but I think that when people fall in love, they think it's forever, and they tell their partner it's forever, but it never is forever. And they're all love affairs end badly because either the person leaves you or they die. I mean, they're going to leave you in some way or other. So I guess all we really have is happy moments in our life. I mean, we should be happy with our moments that we have, because in the long run, it's going to be not so happy. I don't know.
Another question coming up now. Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to ask you a question about your relationship as a writer with Gertrude Stein. As we were reading a previous life, I found some similarities, some explicit references even to Gertrude Stein's autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, probably her most important novel. And we read it as a book club in March, by the way. So there are three issues that are very important, I think. On the one hand, there's this meta-textual level where Gertrude Stein apparently writes a book seemingly concerning Alice B. Toklas, but really it is a book that is centered on Gertrude Stein herself, in fact. And the same, even in your book, seems to happen with Ruggiero really talking very much about Edmund White as a literary expedient or trick, so to speak. And then secondly, there's also this idea, there seems to be a similarity of narcissism with autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. I still remember a passage where Alice says she's only got to know three geniuses in her life. One is Picasso, another one I can remember, and then of course the third one was Gertrude Stein herself. And so that seems to also happen in your own book with Ruggiero being somebody absolutely charming and handsome. And it is not a coincidence that he falls in love with you, Edmund White. And then finally, which is more of a literary thing, it's the idea of using the lofty formula of this name and surname to refer to oneself, with Alice B. Toklas, the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, doing exactly the same again with Gertrude Stein as Gertrude Stein rather than just Gertrude, for instance. And I think that the same kind of happens in your own book. So I was wondering.
I can see the similarity, and I certainly found the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas to be a very important book for me. I mean, I loved that book, and I always thought it was so funny. I mean, like where she invites Ezra Pound for tea, and then he sits in a chair that where Picasso did the drawing on the seat, and Alice B. Toklas did the sewing of it, and he makes such a wild talk with moving his arms so around that he breaks the chair, and she says he's a Picasso. I mean, yeah, Picasso. No, Ezra Pound was a very good village explainer. If you were a village. I mean, it's just so funny and crazy, and when they run into Ezra Pound again, he says, "Oh, I want to come back for tea," and she says, "Well, I have a terrible headache, and Miss Toklas is gathering raspberries, so that's why he can't come." Anyway, it is very sly and funny, but the difference is that I think her narcissism is much more positive. I mean, she sees herself as wonderful and talented and brilliant and a genius, whereas I don't think Edmund has much respect for himself. I think they have I mean, there is a kind of narcissism of disgust in my book, but I think that it's not an obvious choice. I mean, to me, it's terribly funny. Even when I listen to you describing, oh, he has a tiny penis and he's impotent and he smells bad and so on. To all that to me is so funny in a kind of sick way, I guess. But anyway, but I do think they're very different. I mean, I think that Gertrude Stein was very anchored in the minutiae of her life. And whereas I think I paint with broader strokes. And I think that I think her book is very, very witty. And mine is occasionally funny, but not as funny. And she's much more optimistic about herself and her future glory and so on than I would be.
Good evening, Mr.
Hello.
White. I'd like to ask you, this year we also read Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and in this novel, it's pretty clear to the reader that in the novel there are some stories or messages that only her partner, her lover, Vita Sackville, could be able to understand, possibly. So we were wondering if, even within this novel of yours, there are certain aspects or messages that only the real life Ruggiero would be able to understand to the full, and to what extent these references to the real story also has created certain nuances that the average reader would not be able to decipher, really. For instance, maybe only this Ruggiero in real life would be able to understand what you're talking about in certain instances. Do you think this is the case or not?
Well, the first 2/3 of the book I wrote when I was still lovers with Ruggiero character, and he would tell me the story of his life, and he would read my pages one after another, and say that's right, that's wrong, and so on. But the last third, I wrote after he left me, uh, and um, and so I don't know what. I mean, one friend of mine called it revenge porn, that I was trying to get back at Ruggiero, but I don't think so. I think even in the earlier sections where other people might think I was criticizing Ruggiero for being so narcissistic, I always thought he was worthy of worship. I always worshiped him. And so I, I don't think that when I have him talking about how beautiful he is or how talented he is, I mean, he read all those pages and didn't think they were obnoxious. He thought they were fine. And I mean, maybe that's the true sign of the true narcissist. But the end, where he ends up with a young couple married to a boy and a girl, that actually was based. My great nephew, my niece's son, lives in Madrid, in Barcelona, and he is Spanish, and his girlfriend, his fiancée, is Spanish, but they are both Marxist, and they have a big picture of Stalin on the wall, and they believe in polyamory. I mean, she started with a girlfriend, but then she insisted that he uh, take up with a man, and he had, being Spanish macho, he had no interest in men, but he did it for her, and so then anyway, the novel ends with Ruggiero falling in love with that couple, and partly because the young man looks the way Edmund looked in pictures when he was young, and also because they're very exotic and loving and sweet. And so I don't know. But I mean, the real Ruggiero actually had dinner with them in Barcelona, and he was completely taken by them, enamored by them. And so I got the idea that he would end up with them. I go.
Good evening. Hello. I'd like to ask a question again on behalf of our interpreter, Max, but which you also share. And it's about the book in general. With the book, with the book club, rather, your book kind of simulated very contrasting, opposing emotions. It seems as if you wanted to make the reader think very negatively of you, both as an author and as a person. And if that is so, is it because you were being a bit too sadistic towards yourself, perhaps? And why did you decide to do such a thing?
Well, I guess originally I thought that if I'm going to be critical, harsh with, especially with Ruggiero's lover, that I should treat myself the same way. But then I think I got carried away by being masochistic, which I thought was funny. I enjoyed it. And also in a way, I guess I thought, you know how people are always writing biographies of writers, which Joyce Carol Oates calls psycho. I can't remember what the word was, but she thinks they're always pathologies, that they're not really biographies, but pathologies, where you show the evil or the sickness or the of the character. For instance, Rilke, the German poet, was a terrible man, and there's several biographies of Rilke that talk about how terrible he was. And I felt like I would beat the competition to that. I mean, that in other words, I would show myself as terrible rather than waiting for a biographer to do it. And for me, in a very kind of neurotic way, I found it very funny to write that way about myself. And also, I think that one of my almost unconscious motivations was to be so harsh with myself that my friends would say, "Oh, come on, you're still handsome, you're still charming, you're still intelligent." I mean, that I would seem like I'd gone too far. And that would make, like, I had a friend when he turned 40, when he turned 30, he told everybody he was turning 40. So they'd all say, "Oh, you look so young for 40." But he actually was only 30. And it's that kind of strategy, I think. Are you all writers? Do you write, for instance? No? Are you an academic? Professor?
I'm a doctoral researcher myself. Yeah,
Oh,
but we do have one professor in the group. He's not here now.
Uh,
We do have a few professors, history teacher, philosophy teacher. Then we have some doctoral students, the person interpreting for you right now. And he's doing research also about autofiction and about you.
oh,
And then there's me,
okay.
Giacomo, who am a writer,
You are.
as you
Oh,
already
good.
know.
Well, Giacomo, what do you write? Do you write poetry or fiction?
I write fiction, novels, and you and I share the same Italian publisher, by
Oh,
the
good.
way.
That's
And
right.
that's why I'd like to say hello to you on the part of Andrea Bergamini, who is the publisher and couldn't be here, unfortunately, tonight. But he absolutely adored your book and wrote very, very beautiful pages about it. He wrote a letter to us about it so we could know a little bit more about it. And he will, of course, be
Wonderful
watching this
editor. I think he's a
conversation.
wonderful editor and such a generous, intelligent man. I like him a lot. He always says to me, "Am I your favorite editor in the world?" And I said, "Yes." I mean, he is. I think he's so nice.
And you are our favorite author, or at least of very many of us. Now we'll have a few more questions, just very, very few. We don't want to tire you. So
No, fine.
we'll
I
just
love
ask
it. I'm enjoying it.
Andrea, a young man, to ask you the next question.
Okay.
Hello. Yes, my question is about the figure of the intellectual, which is a big debate that we're having in Italy and in France as well. This figure used to be the engagé thinker who could decipher the times and also engage with the public opinion in a powerful way. People like Pierpaolo Pasolini in Italy, but also Foucault, that you mentioned, or Jean-Paul Sartre in France. And these figures seem to be slightly disappearing.
Oh,
right now.
please go. He's speaking English. Go ahead.
And do you, you've met many of them, and as an intellectual yourself, what do you feel about, do you feel that this figure has changed its role in its society? Has it been replaced by influencers perhaps, or is that a positive or negative change that you're seeing?
Well, I'm lucky to know lots of young intellectuals. I mean, like uh, um, um, like and Italian ones too, because I used to be a member of the Italian Institute at Columbia University, and then I lived in Rome and Venice and different places. So I've been fortunate in meeting young intellectuals, and then Ginevra Bompiani was one of I lived in Rome in 1970, and she was one of my best friends, and her husband, the philosopher, um, what's his name, Giorgio Agamben, was a friend of mine, and is, but anyway, I don't know. I guess the intellectuals are a little bit less important. Certainly, I mean, but Foucault hated the Sartre model of the intellectual, where you go to Iraq for 2 days and then you come back and have a manifesto, and and Foucault thought that Genet was a much better example because Genet would go and live with the Palestinians for several years and then come back and have ideas about them or go to the Black Panthers in America and live with them for several months and then have ideas about them. But I think that Foucault kind of defined himself as the anti Sartre, who didn't have an opinion about everything, and who studied the things he did talk about very, very carefully. But anyway, I don't know. Yes, I guess I don't really do social media very much. I mean, very few old people do. But so I'm not really susceptible to influencers. But I think if you pick up any copy of the New York Review of a Review of Books, you or I think you can still see the work of a lot of very intelligent people. I don't know whether you call them intellectuals. In America, that's sort of a bad word, and people are very quick to say, "Oh no, I'm not an intellectual. I'm just a professor or something." But they, I think the word intellectual, I think, was Russian originally, and 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 uh, it, it defined a certain class of workers and the intellectual. But I don't know. I don't think there are very many people in the world who like that label. I think that if you think about gay intellectuals, the interesting thing is that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, people like Pasolini or people like Jean Genet, yes, they were interested a little bit in gay problems, but they were really interested in world problems, in the problems of minority groups like the Palestinians or the Panthers, or and about poverty throughout the world. Anyway, and I always felt that the modern gay thinker was too directed to gay problems, and that they don't look enough at world problems. And I don't know, that's just my own silly opinion. I mean, like Genet's best friend was Angela Davis, and they spent a lot of time with the Black Panthers and other Black progressives. But finally, they broke with them because they felt like they had a race analysis of everything, but they should have had a class analysis. And it's true that very poor American whites don't usually join forces with very poor Black people in America, that the racial divide is so great that people don't see their common interests. And I don't know. I think that it's interesting that only in very primitive Christian churches do Black people and white people in the South mix with each other. They all are in the same church, but that's very unusual. Anyway, the Americans are obsessed with race, and we're obsessed with um, cultural identity. And I have an Italian friend who is now just started being a student in America, in California, and he's trying to become a psychiatrist. And the question for all the students was, do you think the cultural identity of your patient is very important or not so important? And I said, if you say, as he says to me, as an Italian, I don't notice cultural differences. I said, they're going to, first of all, talk about Mussolini, then they're going to talk about the Holocaust and the racial laws and all this stuff, because Americans are obsessed with that. And he had a very bad experience with his class where he said, as an Italian, I don't notice cultural differences. And I said, well, if I had a patient and she was a Muslim girl, I would think her cultural differences would be important. But if he was a boy from Kansas, maybe not so important. Anyway, I'm sorry to get off the subject, but I don't know. It is true that we probably have many fewer intellectuals now. Here's my handsome husband just coming back. I'm on my Italian roadshow. No, with this book group.
Oh, hello. Oh, hello.
So say hello to Michael for us.
Saluti to Michael.
Hi, how are you?
He says, come here.
Did you show them this?
Michael
No.
is spoken about very directly and a very special way in this book, we might
Yeah.
say, because of his role. It's very
Yeah.
realistic as well. And it
Yes.
takes you back to reality in a sense, but it's also kind of a presence for you who's always there, stable presence for you. At the end of the book, you say if Edmund White wins the Nobel Prize, it will be Michael, taking him or going to, to the collection of the prize with him, not Ruggiero.
Hi everyone.
Hiya. Hello.
Cute people.
If that's all right with you, I'd like to ask you a question, Edmund. It's the second last question. That's all right. And it is a question about the relationship between literature and victim playing or self-pity. As I was saying before, I think that this book has lots of different levels of reading. I enjoyed reading it very, very much. But then at the end of it, I kind of felt there's a sense of tragedy and sadness for the topics that dealt with. As you were saying, abandonment or old age. The characters, however, are not people who play the victim. And Edmund White, for instance, the character, even though he's described so brutally and even he's laughable at times and he's undesirable, still he's not described as a victim. And old age is spoken about very honestly, without trying to elicit compassion from the reader towards the old person. And so without kind of trying to play up sentimental auras or things like that. In Italy, intellectuals, or some intellectuals at least, criticize the tendency on the part of some writers to write books about victims only. So people who, or characters who are victims who grew up in the slums, are very poor, discriminated against in a very hostile environment. But very often what happens to them is that they are sanctified, they become virtuous. And the victim, very often, it's said, the victim is blackmailing in literature because as such, by definition, the victim is holy, sacred, cannot be blamed, cannot be attacked, is unassailable, because the only feeling or emotion that you can feel towards them is, of course, just sympathy. However, books probably must not create just empathy. Perhaps they should create sympathy, in my opinion. Revulsion. They shouldn't show us back to ourselves. They should show something different from us. And in my opinion, nothing like this happens in your book or in your books, in fact. And there is no quest for this sentimentalism or victim playing. And very often what you do is engender antipathy, hostility, and and revulsion towards your own characters. So my question then is, this idea of not giving in to the blandishments of victim playing, is this something that you deliberately wanted to achieve through the book? And do you agree that there is a tendency in contemporary literature to try and be self-pitying or play the victim?
Well, you know, for years and years, I taught creative writing at Princeton University, and my wonderful young students would oftentimes write about old people, but always in a very sentimental way. They loved each other and had for 50 years. They were completely devoted to each other. They felt totally fulfilled. They loved their children and their grandchildren. And I would always say things to shock them. I said, you know, your parents now are maybe 45 and you're 20. And so your parents love you. But when their parents get to be 60, they won't like you anymore. And because they'll want to, they like only people their own age. And they lose interest in their children. And so that's a ridiculous generalization to make, but I would do it because it would wake them up and get them out of their sentimentality about old people. And you know, I had other things shocking things I would say like that, but often about age. And but I do. But my students, when they would write about their grandparents, that it was always very loving, and they were loving, and they were happy, and they were fulfilled, but they were sad that they had to die, you know, and they were perfect. Um, so I don't know. Yes, I think you're right that most people are very sentimental about age because it's too hard to look at. You know who really did look at it was the French playwright Ionesco. He he's absolutely pitiless about old age and is very funny on the subject.
How, oh, what you're talking about in terms of talking about old age in a very realistic way, and sex in old age is something very, very interesting. I think in Italy it's still kind of a taboo in that sense. But how about, as we were saying before, victims in literature? So creating characters that are often victims. And do you think that this tendency is real? It's something that is growing at the moment? Or from a perspective as a US reader, do you agree or not? Maybe.
I'm not sure, but I don't really see that so much in American fiction right now. But maybe it is there. I just don't. You know, you never read enough. I read a lot because I'm a judge of a literary contest in Italy, and so I choose the best books that were translated this year into Italian for uh, for Beatrice von Rizzori. She has a contest, and I'm one of the three judges. But anyway, so I read a lot of fiction from in French and Italian and in from America and England, and I can't read German, so I read translations of German books. But my impression is not that but I do think there's a still. I lived in Rome in 1970, and at that time people would say to me, intellectuals at parties or diplomats at parties who would be intellectual would say, "What are you writing your novel about?" And I'd say, "Oh, it's just a love story," and they would laugh because they were all Marxists, and the idea of writing about love seemed so primitive to them. And you know, I was very puzzled at the time, but because in America, you rarely meet Marxists, but in Italy all the time. And so, you know, I think that part of the victim writing is to show, even if you are yourself a middle-class writer, you want to show that you have sympathy for the poor, the sick, the immigrant, or, you know, and I think that's fine. It's fine.
Thank you very much, Edmund. We have our very last question. It's very, very interesting, in fact. And that's gonna be Mara asking you. Good evening, Mr. White. I'm bringing a question by your editor here. I do feel that this question is also very much mine, in a sense. I do share its feeling. In one passage of your book, you have one of your characters admit that none of his feelings and desires were consistent or politically correct. And in other words, we might say, this means that we can say whatever we want in our life, but after all, in our everyday situations, it's very, very hard to make what we feel and what we would like to feel coincide with each other. And the greatness of your own oeuvre is, of course, to try and not just give in to the good manners, so to speak, but rather to kind of favor the true manners, truthfulness. So do you think that it is important that an author does not give in to the politically correct, both in life and in literature?
Well, you know, yes, I do. I do very much. And I think that, but now we have a very strange thing in America that's called sensitivity reading. That means that after they buy your book and they edit it, they give it to a sensitivity reader who makes comments about whether it's a little bit racist or a little bit not politically correct, and so on. So, for instance, I said of a man, he was a Mexican, but the sensitivity reader said, you have to say he was a Mexican man. You can use Mexican as an adjective, but not as a noun. And everything is like that now in America. And so with sensitivity readers, I try to make a few changes just to please them, but I try not to change everything completely. And now I'm writing a novel about a young man who commits suicide and who is sort of falling apart throughout the book, and he's anti-Semitic. He doesn't like women. And he's anti-black, and he talks about all that very openly. I don't know how the readers are going to feel about this book, because it's obviously a pathology on the part of the character. You know, like if Dostoevsky showed Raskolnikov as being perfect and having no problems at all, it would seem a little strange, I think. And so anyway, I do think that it's hard for people to stick to the truth, but many good writers do. I mean, like I'm reading Tolstoy's Childhood, Boyhood, and Youth now, and it's such a beautiful book. And he's so honest about all of his feelings and the shades of feelings, and the jealousy, the envy, the anger, and he hates the way he looks. He thinks he's so ugly. And so he talks constantly about his horrible looks. And anyway, it's a triumph of truthfulness, but that makes it unusual also, I suppose. Mara, are you a writer? No.
I'm afraid I'm not.
What do you do?
I work on the trade. I sell jewelry, so I don't have anything to do with your world.
But I bet you have beautiful jewelry.
Yes, Italian is the best, of course.
Oh, yes, of course. That's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you. I'm very flattered by your careful reading of my work. And thank you. This would never happen in America, only in France or Italy. Thank you very much.
Edmund, it's in fact us that need to thank you very, very, very much. And for us, you are a very important person, and you have left your mark in our book club debates, but also, you know, just our evenings that we spend reading books by you. Behind me, there's a lot of books, and some of them are, in fact, some of your own novels. The Joy of Gay Sex, which is very, very rare in Italy, translated into Italian, is also among those books. And there's some very pornographic pictures as well that are absolutely stunning. So we would like to thank you very much. And I'm doing that on behalf of everyone. And we'd like to invite you again when your next book is out as well, so that you can
love that.
too.
I would love that. Okay. I will always be at your service.
Thank you very much again.
Grazie, boy.
Bye. Take care. Thank you, Edmund.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you
Goodbye.
so much.
Bye.
Pronto la registrazione? Ok.